The best thing about being able to write to a bunch of strangers on the internet is that they don't know who I really am, or if I'm telling the truth. Hell, some of you may know my name, but that's really the extent of it. So, here I am, spilling my heart out because this is the only way I can truly escape from the horrors of my life. My early childhood was relatively normal. I was always a big talker, and though it was annoying at times, my mother and father would always listen to what I had to say and never made it seem like I was bothering them. Our family never had a lot of money, but hell, he really tried his very hardest to make it easy for my mother and me. When I was around 8, he started going to Korea to find temporary jobs that paid especially well. At first, he would only leave for 2 months a year, but soon it became 6 months. By the time I was 13, he was gone for 2 years, and my mother started to become overcome with more and more stress. With having zero outlets to relieve her stress, she started coming to me. Not for advice, but for a punching bag. Everything I did from the time I was 13 to 16 was completely monitored and controlled by her. She took me out of my school and started homeschooling me. I wasn't allowed to leave my house unless she gave me permission, and I was to practice my piano, guitar, and trumpet for 2 hours each. Started to lose friends because I was never allowed to leave my house. And my extended family slowly grew to dislike me, because I was always acting out whenever we gathered together for the holidays. I never wanted to be the problem child, but that was the only time I felt like I had a sliver of freedom. My mother did take me out once a week, however. It was a nice trip to the dead-end street about 300 yards away from our house. She would roll up our windows and take out a small sheet of paper. On that list was every single sin she saw me do. Lies, impure thoughts, yeah, fuck her for thinking she knew what was going through my head. Gluttony, skipping out on a couple of minutes of practicing my instruments, and questions that I managed to answer incorrectly on a made-up test by her. For everything on the list, she would use her index finger and thumb, grab a sizable chunk of skin and flesh and twist and pull. She would say that she was shaping me into a better person. If I flinched or screamed, she would punch me in my back or on my stomach. And those were the worst 3 years of my life. It all ended the day my mother and father filed for divorce. I wanted to go with my father, but the ever-so-intelligent court felt like my mother was the more fit parent. The entire drive home after court was the longest 45 minutes of my life. I thought about running away. Hell, I was 16, I could easily find a part-time job and make it work. But I just couldn't muster up the courage. When we got home, I let out a sigh and walked behind my mother into our house. You can only imagine my surprise when I saw the most beautiful woman in the world sitting in our living room. She slowly stood up and walked up to my mother. After a couple of seconds, they gave each other a quick kiss. The lady saw my mouth hanging open and laughed before saying, "Well, you must be Jason. Your mother has told me so much about you. You can call me Affy." I gave her a shy smile and nodded my head. Life was different after that. Mother was happy, and Affy was the best person I had ever met. 8 years of absolute bliss. During that time, I went back to traditional schooling, placed in the top 10% statewide, landed a full scholarship to one of my choice colleges, and finished college in 4 years with a perfect GPA. My mother wasn't really involved with my life, but Effie sure as hell made sure I told her everything while I was home during breaks. The day of my college graduation, my mother was sitting somewhere in the middle, while Effie fought her way to the front and snapped as many pictures as she could, while I walked on stage to grab my diploma. My mother maybe clapped twice. It's been 3 days since my graduation, and ever since I came back home, Effie and my mother have been acting strangely. First thing that threw me off was that my mother will cry non-stop throughout the night. I can hear Effie telling her she will be fine, but nothing will stop her from crying. In the morning, she'll look like everything's fine, but shit, she barely says anything to me anyways. My mother will also walk into my room at random times, stare at me, and whispers something under her breath before running out as quickly as she can out of my room. I tried to hear what she was saying, but I quickly figured out she wasn't speaking in English. Effie's been staring at my mother like she's a piece of meat. Piece of meat that she wants to rip to shreds and devour. I caught her over a dozen times staring at my mother and biting her tongue till it bleeds. Which brings up another thing. Effie's blood isn't red, it's a sort of gold-like color. Now, I can ignore all of that, but the thing that has bugged me the most is the guests that Effie kept bringing over. A man named Nem shook my hand briefly before walking with Effie into her room. After a couple of minutes, I slowly made my way to their door and watched Effie and Nem stare down at my mother's sleeping body. Nem slowly rubbed my mother's midsection and gave Effie a nod before turning around and staring at me. I backed away quickly and ran to my room. Yeah, I know, I'm 24, and I should have just kicked them both out, but like I said, my mother was terrible to me until Effie came around. I trusted Effie more than her. The next guest was a guy that went by the name of Ease. He came to our house yesterday afternoon. I tried being friendly with him and joking around for a bit, but he doesn't really like jokes and smells like sulfur. I listened in on their conversation while they talked in the kitchen, but shit was not making sense. I don't know, it feels like she's going to break free any time. I think it's about time we get rid of her and take Jason. You've got to be shitting me. You think you can do my job better than me, niece? You're just like your father. All noise and lights, but not enough thinking. Oh, shut the hell up. You do have space, right? Yes, just make sure you know what you're doing. Jason is never going to be a Hercules or Achilles, and what you want him to do is far beyond any hero's abilities. He's got up from the table and walked out of the house without saying another word to Effie. That night, I heard my mother crying once again. Effie talked to her for a second before I heard my mother screaming at the top of her lungs. I bolted out of bed and ran to their room. My mother was being held down onto the bed by rotten hands that came out of it. Effie was on top of her with a knife in her hand. Effie turned around and gave me a sad look before slamming the knife into her chest. My mother let out another scream and pulled her head up and looked at me. Jason, you know money loves you. Please help me. Take the knife from her and kill her. I promise I'll treat you better. Please, Mommy needs you. The hands that were holding her down slowly started to come up. Effie jumped off of the bed and held me against her chest as tightly as she could. I tried pulling her off of me, but for over a minute she overpowered me. Right as her grip loosened, I tore myself off of her and stood frozen after I saw my mother's half-eaten body surrounded by 4 creatures. They may have been people before, but everything about them was far from human. Half of their skin was burned to a crisp, while the other half was missing and exposed green rotten flesh. Maggots were crawling in and out of the holes throughout their body, and their bodies were contorted into positions that are only achievable with a dozen broken bones. Effie grabbed me again and dragged me out of the room. I don't know when I fell asleep. Shit. It's mid-morning now, and it all feels like a dream, but after seeing the ripped-up mattress in their room, I was reminded that it wasn't. Effie spoke to me for a bit when I quietly ate my breakfast. Jason, that woman wasn't your mother. Years ago, when your mother and your father just started dating, your father cheated on your mother with me. I became pregnant, and despite your father's protests, I made him promise to watch over you until you grew up. He didn't keep his promise, and your mother snapped. I've approached her many times to allow me to take you into my house, but she wouldn't allow it. After they divorced, I figured it was about time I used my talents. Let her fall in love with me. I don't mean to the point of becoming insane, no. Far worse than that. I wanted her to lose her humanity. I wanted her to become a shell of a person for what she did to you. I used a bit of my charm on you too, actually. Don't you find it odd that you never questioned why I was here? Well, you trusted me so quickly. It's what I do best. You're old enough now. I'm your mother, and you're not human. I tried asking her what I was, but she just said, "You're smart. I'm sure you already know," before getting up and went into her room. My life was shit until I met Affy, or my mother. I don't want your sympathy or your support. I'm just dictating this because I feel like my life is about to get a whole lot more fun. Oh, by the way, if anyone in the underworld somehow has internet, can you tell her I said fuck you?